Okay, now that you understand how blood pressure works, how it's regulated, how the different factors affect blood pressure, and all you have to do is plug it into that algebraic equation, let's talk about why it matters. So there are several consequences of hypertension or high blood pressure. Some of them are adverse consequences that affect the heart, and some of them affect the eyes, the kidneys, the brain. Um, and so this adaptive mechanism at some point becomes maladaptive. And one of the factors or one of the consequences of hypertension is hypertensive heart disease. And this looks very different than if you are like an athlete and you have like a bigger heart, because like an athlete kind of hypertrophy increases the muscles in the heart, increases the muscle cells, but doesn't do it in a way that occludes the lumen. And remember, the lumen is like the empty space that has the blood. And so if you look at this heart, you're supposed to have more room in here. This is a ventricle. Here's the atrium. And so you can see that at some point when these heart muscles, these cardiac muscle cells get hypertrophied, and why are they hypertrophied? Because the heart is a muscle, right? It's like anything else. And so if you have high blood pressure for whatever reason, and you have high blood pressure a lot, and your heart is just pumping, 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 it basically gets beefed up like, any muscle would if it was having to work harder. But in this particular case, it gets so beefed up that then it can't fill with blood. And so hypertensive heart disease really is this um, this hypertrophy of the cardiac muscle cells. And one of the reasons why this is so serious is because of the way that the heart that receives blood and oxygen and nutrients. And it's a little counterintuitive. And I think that there's a different section that actually goes into this in a little bit more detail. But basically, when the heart squeezes the blood out during systole, the rest of the body, gets the oxygenated blood, right? It pushes it out. But because the heart, because the vasculature within the walls of the heart muscle get compressed whenever it's squeezing, and think of it like a sponge, it can't receive that blood flow during systole like the rest of the body, because the heart doesn't just like absorb the blood that's in the ventricles. The blood has to go out through the aorta and then come off into little coronary arteries. But those coronary arteries have too high of a pressure for the blood flow to be able to like enter the actual wall of the heart muscle. And so it actually has to relax in order to get the oxygen and the nutrients. And so it's a little bit different than the rest of the body. And we'll go over it again in a different section. But because of hypertension, because now these cardiac muscle cells are beefed up and hypertrophied, and there's not even enough room in the ventricle to pump out blood, but also the wall is so thick that really the blood has to like flow much deeper. Then you get areas of ischemia, right? And this can lead to a heart attack. But the other thing that it can lead to is heart failure, because you only have this little tiny pocket of, area or lumen to fill with blood. You're not pumping a whole lot out. And so things tend to get backed up. And so some of the symptoms are like you get fluid in your lungs, you get shortness of breath, you get these big abdominal swellings because fluid is just pushing out. And so this is like the whole concept of that effusion and edema, right? There's pressure upstream, and so then it backs up, and that increases your hydrostatic pressure, and it pushes fluid out. And so you also get like swelling of the legs. The other consequence of high blood pressure is easy to understand if you just think Now go back and think of the vasculature like a bunch of pipes, right? If we're turning up the pressure and, blood is flowing at full force, then we're going to do some damage. And so you get these like thick blood vessels that aren't supposed to be like that. And you also get damage. And so atherosclerosis is a topic that we will talk about next.